Have you ever had a 3D print come out stringy or hairy like this? Well, today what we are going to cover is retractions and how to tune your 3D printer for the best prints possible. If you have been following along with my channel, you will know that I won this great 3D printer, the Ender 3, from Electroboom's YouTube channel. And because I feel like tuning another 3D printer, I have been trying to figure out exactly the right settings for this guy to print very nice. Now, maybe you have had some troubles with your prints. Let me know in the comments if you have. And in particular, what I would like to know is what you did to tune in your Ender 3 for just a very fine finish on your prints. And to give you an example, here is one print that I had made where I didn't quite get it right. We would call this a Prince Harry sort of print there. Now we got the nice combable features on this. Maybe it's probably not what you want. What I would prefer is a print that comes out extra clean. No post-processing, no cleanup involved at all. So this guy, well, absolutely functional, easy to clean up with maybe a lighter, a torch, a heat gun, or a knife. I don't want them coming out like this because, honestly, I don't want the extra work. And sometimes it may give you problems, say down in this hole here. There's so much stringing that it may give you problems with getting the bolts through. So it can cause some fitment problems. And I don't want that. Nobody wants that on their prints. They want them to come out as perfect as possible. So what we are going to talk about today is what I did to tune in this 3D printer. And today, really what you want to do is only adjust one setting at a time. This is a huge thing for getting a 3D printer dialed in for yourself. And a lot of times I'll see people, they're chasing strings or they're chasing delaminations or something like that, and they will change 2, 3, 4 or more settings at the same time. And this is an extremely bad way to do things. It's like trying to have a scientific test, but you have no protocols at all for how you're doing it, and you just are blindly, throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. That does not work very well. So today what I did was I only changed the retraction on this printer. So just to give you a little preview of what the printer does when it starts out. We start with this wipe, and essentially it goes, about 100 millimeters. Yeah, about 100 millimeters. It extrudes 15 millimeters of plastic through the stepper motor, and then it steps over a ½ millimeter and then goes back another 100 millimeters and then has a quick wipe at the end to kind of break off the plastic there. It also extrudes another 15 millimeters. Now on this printer, it's having trouble extruding out quite so much. So as it gets to about right here, I can actually hear the printer clicking. So the plastic is simply not being shoved through with enough heat, or maybe we could say that our feed rates are too much. However we want to talk about that, essentially I need to tune this down a little bit. Instead of pushing out 15 millimeters of plastic and 15 more, I'm thinking either drop down to 10 and 10, or we could do 15 and 10. It really doesn't matter. This swipe here is only to prime our nozzle. It's not really something that's critical, but as you can see, it gets thicker as the nozzle gets more and more primed, and it turns around. It's nice and primed. We can actually see, I don't know if you can quite catch enough detail on there. This is when the stepper starts to skip, and we're essentially trying to ask too much of our hot end. And of course we could just turn up our temperature, but that's chasing the cat's tail at this point. What I would prefer to do is tune that to where it's not pushing out too much plastic. So that's what I'll do on the next time. Now, to the point. After it does this little priming nozzle, we go to our retraction test. And as you can see, some of them worked out great and some of them didn't. This is only 2 millimeters of retraction. This I jumped up to 5 millimeters of retraction, 6 and 7 millimeters of retraction. If you look at them, the 7, the 6, and the 5, they really don't look all that different. If we get up very close on the surface finish, maybe I can tell a difference here. Nope. Yeah, honestly, yeah, a little more porosity on the 7 millimeter. You probably won't be able to pick that up on the camera, but there's just a little bit of pinholes on there. And more than likely what's happening is that when you get too much retraction, it'll actually inject a little bit of air in there, or it won't quite restart all the way because of the speeds of your printer. It's just not it's just not recommended to have too much retraction. And if you go way too far on retraction, what'll happen is the plastic gets pulled out of your hot end way too much, and you'll either end up with a jam because it'll go completely out of the hot end and then slam back into the hot end, or you will just end up having air bubbles getting pushed into your plastic. And neither of those are a good thing. So what I would recommend is either starting low and working your way high, or starting high and then working your way low until you get to the point of stringing. And I know from experience that 5mm is about the sweet spot for this Bowden tube at the speed that I'm printing and the heat that I'm printing and everything else. So that really does lead us into the next part. So when you are tuning, you need to have everything stable except for the one thing that you're tuning. And here are the settings that I had using Simplify 3D for this test. 205 degrees Celsius on the filament. 65 degrees Celsius on the bed, which isn't really pertinent to this, but I'll go ahead and list it. 0.2mm for our coast, 2mm starting on the wipe. Oh, I'm sorry, we had 2mm wipe on all of these. Then I did a variable on the retract, 2, 5, 6, 7mm, etc., etc. I also was printing at 60mm a second speed. However, I also made the change to where if the layer is less than 15 seconds, we give it a little bit longer time to print so it has time to cool down. And I set this to where it'll go down to 20% of our speed, or a 5-fold decrease in speed if our layer time is less than 15 seconds. Now, without looking at the G-code, I couldn't tell you exactly how fast it was printing on this, but it definitely was not at a full 60mm a second. So these variables all change how it's going to be. If I am printing at a faster speed, maybe if I was sitting at the 5mm retract on this, the layers are very long. They're not going to hit that 15-second mark, so we're going to be printing at the 60-second mark, or 60mm a second speed. And there's a lot of different variables, and that's why I say only change one at a time. So if you print this, and man, your retraction settings work perfectly on this, but they don't work perfectly on this, only change one setting to get back to where you need to be on your retract, or whatever the case may be. The coast is one. The coast, I have 0.2mm coast on there, so it stops extruding 0.2mm before it gets to the end of its print line. And what that does is let a little bit of pressure out of your Bowden tube before you let the retract pull all the pressure out. And at a higher speed, you need more coast than you do at a lower speed. And like I said, it's one of those things that where when you start tweaking more than one thing at a time, it's extremely difficult to figure out what exactly is going on. So print the same object, only tweak one thing, and then when you get it to a good setting, start tweaking other things, or take those settings to another part, and make sure you save your old settings and have a new setting for your new part. It becomes a rabbit hole. So when do you call it quits? How perfect is perfect? For me, it's more of a fitment issue. Not a surface quality issue, but a fitment issue, because, this will probably fit just fine. These printed in a different color of plastic, so everything was different. To give you a point here, different color of plastic, these were the same settings. These were the exact same settings on our retract, just the whole gamut. This was the exact same settings. And as you can see, the black plastic was much stringier than this gray plastic. So 2mm retract on this, 2mm retract on this, and we just had some fuzzies on this one, whereas on this one, it really, it was stringing the whole way, really long strings on there. Yeah. the Prince Harry look. To the point, you'll even need to tune for different colors of plastic. And that is really when you start getting into the fine art of printing. So when should you expect that your printer settings may not transfer over? The big thing is when you change filament types. Your settings for PETG will not be the same as your settings for PLA. Let me know in the comments what you have found to actually be a good transfer between your different types of filaments, whether it be PLA to ABS or PETG, nylon, whatever you may be printing at the time. Which also, let me know what you're printing. I want to know what people are usually using out there. Myself is usually a TPU and PETG sort of guy, but it's kind of nice to be able to have the PLA for the fast prototypes, basic retraction testing, stuff like that, to where speed is kind of the essence. So, changing filament, that's a huge one. When you change filament types, you will have to tweak your settings greatly. So make sure you keep your files separate. Make sure you name them as you should with each different type of filament. So the next one, a color change. As I showed on this was simply a color change between filaments, and we needed different retraction settings on this. So going from 2 millimeters to 5 millimeters obviously worked good for the black. I could probably use 3 millimeter on the gray. You know, easier just to have 5 millimeters if it works for most plastics all the way across the board. So that's probably what I'll do, because simplicity is also a virtue in this. I don't want to have 100 different settings files for one different type of plastic just because I'm changing colors. If I figure out that 5 millimeters works for almost all of them, I'm going to do that. And only if I have one weird color. For instance, I have a purple haze PETG that prints terribly. Oh man, I almost don't even want to bring this up, but I can print with almost every other PETG on exactly one setting file for everything, and then I switch to this purple haze, and there is nothing that I can do. There is no speed settings that I can do to make the surface finish the same. There is no retraction settings that I can do to make the surface finish the same. The purple is just a terrible color to print in, and sometimes that is the game. You'll find a bad type of filament and you just got to work around it, or you just don't use it. That's all that there is to it. So keep that in mind. When you change colors or even brands for the same type of filament, you will probably have to change your setting some unless you've already found your magic tune. So the next thing that will change your setting some is when you have your temperature change. A hotter temperature will be stringy. I typically will print at a hot temperature. I want to have prints that are better for, strength pretty much. I want to, make sure that they're good enough on my dimensional accuracy, which is usually a colder print, but I want them to be strong. So I usually print on the hotter side, which does make more retraction needed. If I bump this down to 185, I bet you the 2 millimeter would be enough. But again, that's you're chasing the cat's tail. That is a whole another hole to go down to when you are tweaking things. But if you print PLA, let me know what kind of temperatures that you print at and also why you print. So are you printing for a good surface finish, or are you printing for structural rigidity? Let me know. All right, so the next things that will change it, the speed of your print. The slower that you print, especially with a Bowden tube setup, the slower that you print, the less pressure that you will have behind your nozzle when you get to the end of a print line. Because of this, the faster that you print, the more retraction that you will need to keep up with your stringing. So again, you change one thing at a time. If you want to try for a 2 millimeter retraction, then essentially you would make your temperature lower, or you would make your speed lower until that 2 millimeter retraction works. There's really no reason to be tuning in this regard, but just to let you know, you could do it. And you just have to make sure. Again, I want to beat this into your head. Only change one thing at a time. So moving on, what is the last thing that will change all of your settings? And to tell you the truth, this will change them all more than anything else that we could possibly do, and that is the nozzle size. So pretty much every printer comes with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle diameter on the orifice. When you get larger and larger diameters on the orifice, you not only need to either bump up your temperature, or you need a hot end that will take that sort of heat throughput. Because as you are increasing the size of your nozzle, you're increasing the width of your lines that you print, typically of course. And because of that, you need more heat in your nozzle. Most people just bump up their temperature some. So instead of going, let's say if I went to a 0.8 millimeter nozzle, we would be flowing twice the amount of plastic through there. I can guarantee it's not going to keep up at 60 millimeters a second. I can pretty much guarantee that. However, what you can do is kind of trick it and bump it up to 225 Celsius or 235. And as long as you don't have any layers where it starts to go really slow, like at the top, if you have a slowdown because the layers are less than 15 seconds, for example, you may start burning plastic then. So it's a really fine line between tweaking one thing and not ruining a different part of the print. But that nozzle size is a huge difference. And to tell you the truth, what I would typically do, if I'm wanting at least a structural part, is that I would double the size of the nozzle, and then if I know that the nozzle won't take the heat throughput, I will actually decrease my speed by half. Now, that does get into some other problems. Your retraction will be totally different for a larger nozzle size. You'll need to have more retraction typically, or faster retraction, to make sure that it's not oozing out of there. And again, we could get into a whole nother topic of tuning for your nozzle size, and I think that's probably going to be a little bit too much for today. But I would like to know, what nozzle size do you use on yours? Do you stick with the 0.4 millimeter nozzle size? Maybe you go smaller. Maybe you print really small stuff and you like the 0.2, or maybe you have a big printer, and in those cases, I believe that the really big, the 0.8 or the 1 millimeter nozzle size is actually very well suited for it. You get better structural rigidity on your parts. You also get faster prints, and in a lot of times, you don't really have to give up a whole lot as far as your surface finish is concerned, but you can really push some plastic through as long as the hot end will take the heat. So I do think that that covers our retraction test for the day. As you can see, just to recap, the 5 millimeters was just about perfect for this one with all of the other settings that I had. So you got to keep that in mind. The filament that I was printing, the color of the filament that I was printing, the temperature that I was printing at, the speed that I was printing at, the 0.2 millimeters of coast, the 2 millimeters of wipe, and everything added up together to make the settings what I was looking for, which is a nice, fine, small feature print that doesn't have any stringing between it. Because once we get to this point on here, we can pretty much move to any other larger part and have a much easier understanding of where we need to be for our settings. So, as always, if you have more questions about this particular topic or any other topic in the world, like where do babies come from, then ask them down below and I will do my best to get to them. So, as always, thanks for tuning in and have a good day.